Picture this. You have just left your body, not in a dream, not in a meditation, for real. The last breath has left. The weight of the physical world, every ache, every worry, every unfinished thought is simply gone. And then you see it, ahead of you, at the end of what feels like a long, dark corridor, a light, warm, familiar, the kind of warmth that doesn't just touch your skin, it touches something deeper, something you didn't even know was cold, and moving toward you, inside that light, faces, people you recognize, people you loved, people you lost, reaching for you, welcoming you home. Every religion tells you this is salvation. Every near-death experience account describes it. Every culture on every continent across all of recorded human history points toward the light and says, "Go there. That is where you belong." The Gnostics read the same accounts. They studied the same traditions. They sat with the same texts. And they came to a conclusion so disturbing, so precise, so difficult to dismiss once you've heard it, that the early church spent 400 years trying to bury every document that contained it. They said, the light is real, but it is not what you think it is. Welcome to Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. I'm glad you're here for this one, because tonight we're going somewhere that most investigations into ancient wisdom don't go. We're not stopping at the cosmology. We're not stopping at the philosophy. We're following the Gnostic tradition all the way to its most radical, most unsettling, most carefully documented conclusion. What actually happens after you leave this world? And why, if the texts are right, the answer should change how you think about everything that happens before it. Before we go in, if you're the kind of person who can't leave a question like this alone, hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. These files have found their way into places that genuinely surprise me. And as always, the visuals are here to pull you into the atmosphere. But the real journey, as ever, is in the words. Now, let's begin. In the last episode, we met the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth, the blind craftsman who built this world from stolen light in a corner of the cosmos so sealed off from the true divine that he genuinely believed, with the absolute certainty that only total ignorance can produce, that he was the highest power in existence. We followed the architecture of his creation, the 7 Archons, each placed at a layer of reality like wardens on the floors of a prison, the counterfeit cosmos, a copy of the Pleroma built by a being who had only ever seen its faintest reflection. The fragment of Sophia's divine light that he breathed into the human body, not realizing what he was giving away, not realizing that in that single act he had placed the one thing he could never control directly inside the beings he thought he owned. And at the end of that episode, I left you with a question. What happens when you leave this world? Most people assume that is the escape, that death is the door out, that whatever waits on the other side must be better than this, warmer, truer, finally free of the weight of material existence. The Gnostics had a specific, detailed, carefully reasoned answer to that question, and it begins with the thing we were all taught to trust most. There is an assumption so deeply embedded in human culture that most people have never once questioned it. It lives underneath religion, underneath philosophy, underneath the instinctive comfort we reach for when someone we love is gone. The assumption is this: death is the end of the problem. Whatever this world is, however difficult, however relentless, dying is the exit. The suffering stops, the light comes, and something better begins. It is a beautiful assumption, and across virtually every tradition in human history, it has been actively encouraged. But here is the question the Gnostics refused to stop asking. Who benefits from that belief? If you designed a system whose purpose was to cycle souls back into the material world, again and again, indefinitely, what is the single most important thing that system would need? It would need the souls inside it to want to come back. Or, failing that, it would need them to not know they had a choice. The Gnostics were making a precise claim, not a metaphor, not a poetic flourish. They were saying, the system doesn't end when your body does, and the light at the end of the tunnel, the one that every culture tells you to walk toward, the one that feels like home, is not the exit. It is the entrance to the next cycle. Now, the mechanism that keeps soul cycling is not a lock. It is not a wall. It is not even the Archons, as powerful as they are. Before we get into how the system works, we need to talk about what gives it power over you in the first place. It is guilt. Specifically, the guilt a soul carries at the moment of departure, the accumulated weight of shame, regret, and the deep belief that it hasn't earned the right to go home. Think about the world the Demiurge built. Every major religion on Earth teaches in one form or another that human beings are born broken, flawed in some fundamental way that requires correction. The legal systems of every civilization define wrongdoing, assign guilt, and build entire structures around the idea that certain acts must be permanently held against a person. The Gnostics were asking, why is guilt so universal? Why is it so specifically calibrated to make a being feel it doesn't deserve freedom? Their answer was not comfortable. Guilt, in the Gnostic framework, is not a moral corrective. It is the specific energetic signature that the Archons at the post-death boundary are looking for, the thing that gives them jurisdiction. A soul that arrives carrying genuine, unresolved guilt arrives already holding the door open for them. The system that produces that guilt, built right into the world, encoded into the institutions, handed down through every generation. The Gnostics didn't call this a conspiracy, they called it a design feature. Here is what separates the Gnostic tradition from every other ancient system of thought about what happens after we leave this world. They didn't leave it abstract. Most traditions give you comfort, imagery, a general direction, toward the light, toward peace. The Gnostics gave you something almost shockingly different. They gave you a map, a specific, detailed, procedural account of exactly what a soul encounters after leaving the body, and exactly what is required to navigate it. The primary source is one of the most remarkable documents recovered from the Nag Hammadi library, the Pistis Sophia, a text of such extraordinary detail that scholars have spent decades trying to fully account for everything it contains. According to the Pistis Sophia, the soul's journey after departing is not a peaceful drift toward a welcoming light. It is an interrogation. The soul rises through 7 distinct spheres. Each sphere is governed by an Archon, one of the 7 wardens of the material cosmos we met in the last episode, and at each sphere, that Archon performs something the text describes in almost procedural terms. It reviews your life, not as a compassionate reflection on growth, not as a kind inventory of lessons learned. The Archon at each sphere is specifically searching for evidence of the guilt, the attachments, the unresolved shame that bind the soul to the material world. Every moment of harm, every act of deliberate wrong, examined not to judge them morally, but to assess whether the soul is still energetically attached to the physical world because of them. If that attachment is present, the Archon has grounds to send the soul back. And this is where the Pistis Sophia introduces a detail I find genuinely extraordinary. There are passwords, specific declarations that a soul with genuine gnosis, genuine self-knowledge, can speak at each sphere to demonstrate that the Archon has no jurisdiction. Not prayers, not confessions, not pleas for mercy, statements of identity. I know what I am. I know where I came from. I know where I am going. 3 statements. The Pistis Sophia is explicit. A soul that can make these declarations with genuine embodied understanding, not as recited formula but as lived knowledge, cannot be held at the boundary. The Archon has no claim on it. It passes through. Now, you might think, this sounds like one tradition's specific mythology. Interesting, perhaps, but not necessarily significant beyond itself. Here is where it becomes remarkable. The Gnostics were not the only ones who drew this map. 400 years before the Nag Hammadi texts were written, in ancient Greece, people were being buried with small sheets of gold. These are known today as the Orphic gold tablets, thin, inscribed pieces of metal placed with the dead, not as treasure, but as instruction, a guide for the journey. They describe the soul arriving at a crossroads after departing. guardians asking, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" And the soul's scripted response, literally pressed into gold and buried with the body so the dead person would have it when needed, is this: "I am a child of earth and of starry heaven," an identity declaration, a statement of origin, a password. This is the Gnostic system in ancient Greek burials, 4 centuries earlier, in a tradition with no documented contact with what would become the Nag Hammadi library. Then there is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, a text read aloud to the dying and recently departed over 49 days, specifically to prepare the consciousness for what it will encounter, and its central warning is precise. Do not follow the bright lights. The bright lights are seductive. They feel like liberation, but the Bardo Thodol says they lead back into the cycle of rebirth. The dimmer, quieter presences lead toward genuine liberation. The Gnostics said, "The bright light is the Archon." The warm, welcoming light at the end of the tunnel is a constructed passage back into the spheres, a tradition from Tibet, a tradition buried in the Egyptian desert, none of them in contact, none sharing texts or teachers or institutional frameworks, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years. But they drew the same map. In science, when separate researchers working independently arrive at the same conclusion, it is considered among the strongest possible evidence that something real has been observed. These ancient traditions were not collaborating, but they were all pointing at the same thing. There is a concept in the Gnostic post-death account that I want to give the full weight it deserves, because almost nobody does. It is the cup. According to the Pistis Sophia, and reflected in traditions from Greece, from Persia, from India, before the soul re-enters the physical world, it is given something to drink, a preparation. The specific contents vary slightly across traditions, but the effect is identical in every account. It erases everything, every memory of the previous life, every lesson hard-won across decades of experience, every relationship, every moment of genuine understanding, gone. And most critically, every memory of the Pleroma, every impression that you carry something inside you that doesn't belong to this world, wiped clean, reset to zero. You arrive back as an infant, with no access to anything you learned before, no memory of the trap, no recollection of the boundary or the spheres or the Archons, no knowledge of the passwords, starting over. The ancient Greeks called it the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. The word Lethe is the root of the English word lethargy, a heaviness, a forgetting that feels like sleep. Plato wrote about this in the Republic, in a passage called The Myth of Air. A soldier encounters the entire post-departure mechanism and is sent back to report on what he witnessed. And what does he see? Souls choosing their next lives, and then, before returning, drinking from the plane of forgetfulness. All except himself, who is forbidden from drinking, so that he can remember, so that he can bring the account back. Plato was not writing allegory here. He believed this was a sincere description of a real mechanism. Now think about this through a modern lens. We live in an era where the value of personal data, the record of your thoughts, your habits, your fears, your desires, has become one of the most powerful resources on Earth. Where your accumulated experience is the most commercially valuable thing about you, and every so often the system asks you to click accept and move on. The Gnostics were describing the oldest version of that transaction, a reset so complete that the soul doesn't even know it agreed to it, a system that benefits from your forgetting, administered at the exact moment when you are most vulnerable. The cup isn't offered as a punishment, it's offered as a kindness. Here, rest. You don't need to carry all of that anymore. And the soul, exhausted and unaware, drinks. We need to talk about the tunnel. I want to build this slowly, because this is the section that requires the most precision and the most willingness to sit with something genuinely uncomfortable. Near-death experiences have been documented across every culture on Earth, across every century of recorded history, across people of every religion, every belief system, every level of education, in cultures with no prior exposure to each other's accounts. The consistency of what they describe is, by any objective measure, extraordinary. The sensation of leaving the body, the movement through a dark corridor or tunnel, the light at the end, warm, overwhelming, more vivid than anything in ordinary experience. Figures within the light, familiar, welcoming, deeply loving. A life review, a rapid, panoramic experience of the entire previous life, often described as feeling observed rather than simply remembered. And then, for most, a boundary, a point at which they are told or simply know that they must go back. The accounts are so consistent that researchers have spent decades trying to explain them. Neurological theories, psychological theories, theories about oxygen deprivation and the specific way a brain processes its own shutdown. None of these fully accounts for the cases where people describe accurate, verifiable perceptions of events happening in physical locations they had no access to while clinically without measurable brain activity. The Gnostics were not trying to explain these accounts away. They were saying the accounts are accurate. What you experienced is real, and we have known what it is for 2,000 years. Here is the Gnostic account of the tunnel. The tunnel is not the Pleroma. The true divine realm has no tunnel. It requires no navigation. It is everywhere, instantly, completely, in a way the material mind cannot conceptualize. There is no corridor, there is no welcoming lobby. The tunnel is a construction, built to look like liberation, designed to feel like arrival, engineered to produce exactly the emotional state, relief, recognition, the overwhelming sense of finally being home, that will make a soul willingly step into the next phase of the system. Think of it this way: the most sophisticated institutions ever built by human civilization are not the ones held together by force. Force is expensive. Force creates resistance. The most enduring systems are the ones where the people inside them participate willingly, where the boundaries feel like choices, where the return feels like the right thing to do. The tunnel in the Gnostic account is that system at its most refined, a prison with a beautiful lobby. And the lobby is so convincing that almost nobody thinks to look for the door. The warmth is real, the love is real. The figures you recognize, the grandmother who passed when you were 7, the friend you lost too young, the emotional reality of encountering them is genuine and powerful. But according to the Pistis Sophia, the Archons are capable of something that should stop us cold. They can wear faces. The texts are explicit. Archons can present themselves as beings of light, as figures of divine authority, as those whose appearance would produce maximum emotional trust and minimum critical resistance. And the life review that happens inside the tunnel, that panoramic, overwhelming experience of watching your entire life, is not for your growth. It is a forensic examination. You are not in a therapy session. You are in an intake process, and the being conducting it is specifically looking for the guilt and unresolved attachment that gives it jurisdiction over your next destination. The tunnel feels exactly like what you were always told it would feel like, and that is precisely why the Gnostics treated the knowledge of what it actually is as the most important information a human being could carry. So what do you do with all of this? The Gnostics were not pessimists. The reason these texts were preserved, buried in a sealed clay jar in the Egyptian desert, surviving 16 centuries of suppression, is because the people who wrote them genuinely believed that liberation was possible, that the system had weaknesses, that the Archons, for all their power, were not omnipotent, and they identified 3 specific vulnerabilities in the post-death architecture. The first, refuse the cup. The soul that understands what the cup is, that recognizes the offer of forgetfulness for what it actually is, has the capacity to decline. Not through force, not through resistance, simply through recognition. You cannot trick someone who already knows the trick. The cup loses its power the moment the soul understands what it contains. The second, speak the passwords, not prayers, not petitions to an external authority, declarations of identity. The 3 statements the Pistis Sophia specifies as sufficient to pass through each Archon boundary. I know what I am. I know where I came from. I know where I am going. Simple, devastating in their simplicity, because each of those statements requires something that the Archonic system is specifically designed to prevent you from acquiring. Self-knowledge. Not knowledge of external facts, but the specific, embodied, unshakable knowledge of your own nature. What you actually are beneath the accumulated layers of guilt, programming, and forgetting. And the most important thing the Gnostics said about this? You cannot learn the passwords at the gate. You have to know them before you arrive, which means the work is now, not at the moment of crisis. In the ordinary moments of an ordinary life, the steady, quiet practice of asking the question the system would prefer you never ask, what am I really? The third, recognize the false light. The true Pleroma does not look like the tunnel. It does not feel warm and familiar in the way material things feel warm and familiar. It is not a bigger version of what you already know. It is overwhelming, vast, utterly unlike anything in the material world, because it is not made of the same stuff as the material world. If it feels comfortable, if it feels familiar, if it feels like a homecoming into something you already recognize, be suspicious. Because the thing that built this world is very good at making copies, at producing versions of beauty and love and warmth that are close enough to the real thing to pass inspection at the moment when your defenses are lowest and your longing is highest. The real thing, the Gnostics said, is not comfortable. It is not manageable. It does not ease you in gently. It is the most real thing you have ever encountered, and it will feel like nothing you have ever imagined. Let me bring this back to where we started. The Demiurge, Yaldabaoth, built a world from stolen light. He placed Archons at every level to maintain the system. He encoded guilt and forgetting and the longing for a false home into the very architecture of material existence. And then he breathed Sophia's light into the human being. And that was the mistake he could not undo. Because that fragment, carried inside every human being who has ever lived, whether they know it or not, is not his. It was never his. He cannot touch it, cannot erase it, cannot recycle it with the body or wipe it with the cup. It is the one thing in his entire creation that comes from above the cloud of darkness he was born in. The one thing that reaches, however faintly, toward the Pleroma he cannot perceive. Every question you have ever asked that didn't have a comfortable answer. That was that fragment pressing against the walls of the room it's in. Every moment of beauty that seemed too large for this world to contain. That was the Pleroma bleeding through the seams. Every time you have felt, with a certainty you could not explain, that there is something more than this, that this world is close, but not quite it, that is not confusion. According to the Gnostics, that is memory. If this episode has opened something in you, leave a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. And if you know someone who carries these kinds of questions, the ones that don't go away at night, share this with them. That is how these files reach the people who need them. Hit the like button if this has made you think. Subscribe if you want to follow where this goes next. Because where we are going in the next episode, you will want to be there from the beginning. So you know the trap now. You know the tunnel. You know the cup. You know the life review and what it's actually looking for. You know why the system is built around guilt, and why recognition, not virtue, is the only thing that gets you through. But here's the thing that Yaldabaoth could never explain. No matter how many times he looked at what he had built, no matter how many times he watched a human being live and struggle and forget and return, why do some humans feel like they don't belong here? Not all of them, not even most of them, but some. Some people have always known, on a level they can't fully articulate, can't quite prove, can't talk their way out of, that this world is not their home, that there is something inside them that watches the material world from a slight distance and thinks, this is not what I am. Something that doesn't fit, not in the way that pain doesn't fit, but in the way that a message in a bottle doesn't fit in the ocean. It is in the ocean, it is surrounded by the ocean, but it was never of it. The Gnostics had a name for that feeling. They called it the Pneuma, the divine spark. Not a copy of the Pleroma, not an echo or an impression. The real thing, a fragment of actual divine light hidden inside the human body like a letter written before the material world existed, sealed and thrown into the Kenoma, waiting to be found by the only being that could recognize it. Yaldabaoth can recycle your body. He can wipe your memory. He can send you back through the spheres 10,000 times. He cannot touch the spark, because it was never his. Next time, what it is, where it came from. And here's the part that should unsettle you. The Demiurge knew it was there the entire time. This is Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.